Well, hey everybody. It's let's see, Thursday, the day we are missing class because of the weather. Right after I made the call that and emailed y'all that I wasn't going to have class, about 5 minutes later, they closed campus at Sanford, so I was vindicated. So I just decided maybe the best thing to do would be to give you a video to look over. Now, I have to warn you, I'm sorry about this. This is going to be a little dry. I'm going to do my best to pump it up, but maybe it's good that it's on video. That way you can watch a few minutes and take a break and watch a few minutes and not get bored to death. So, but here's the thing. I was thinking that we've talked a lot about the DSM, and we're getting we're at this stage in the class where we're starting to look at individual cases, right? Case studies, and you're writing on a case study. And I realize that you're somewhat at a disadvantage. I mean, I know that because we're, just now, we're I think almost midway through the semester, and there's so much that we haven't covered yet, right? So there are a few things that I thought we ought to just do a brief overview of kind of what the diagnoses are because they're going to come up a lot in case studies. So anyway, I'll stop prefacing this and just jump in, and you'll see what I'm trying to do here. Okay, so we've been talking about the DSM. I don't have mine here, but it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And by now you've picked up on the fact that this is our big book that has information. It defines for us what all the known mental disorders are, and gives us information about them, and then gives us diagnostic criteria. We'll talk about this for determining if the patient has a given disorder. So let's talk about it in general. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. That's a mouthful. It is the DSM-5 means it's the fifth edition, but I will tell you that the different editions really differ quite a bit from each other, particularly up until DSM-3. So DSM-1 was very short and pretty primitive and published in the 1950s, or like 1952. And then sometime I think in the 1960s, the DSM-2 was published. That's the one I was trained on in graduate school. And then shortly after that, DSM-3 came out. The DSM-3 was kind of a major jump forward in terms of our understanding of these disorders. And it's also a leap from, in DSM-1 and DSM-2, everything was based on what psychiatrists and psychologists sort of talked about, saw in their practice, but it was very subjective. And DSM-3 is the first attempt to really make these diagnoses to fit what we know from research. And so since then, since DSM-3, it has been founded on good research. And I don't mean to sound too much like a fanboy, I'm not. There are all kinds of problems with DSM, but the real gift of the DSM is that it gives us a way to talk about these disorders and describe these disorders that increases the chances that we're talking about the same thing. So if I'm in Los Angeles and I'm a researcher studying schizophrenia, and another researcher is in New York studying schizophrenia, both doing research, it'd be really handy if we both were talking about the same disorder. And that's what diagnostic criteria do. Okay. So this manual is used widely, particularly in the United States. There are others, and the most notable one is what we call the ICD, International Classification of Diseases, which is published by the World Health Organization. The DSM is published by the American Psychiatric Association. The ICD is global and also has classifications of all disorders. So psychiatry is just a section of that. So those two get used a good bit for different settings. We're focusing on the DSM. Okay. So now people have been attempting, probably since the early 20th century, more than 100 years, to try to come up with a fair, workable, reasonable way of classifying mental disorders when you're working against the fact that everybody's different. And so somebody who has major depression is not going to look exactly the same, behave the same, have exactly the same symptoms as another person with major depression. But we do see enough commonality in the symptoms and in the way those diseases or disorders respond to treatment that it's good that we have, a way to kind of compare, um, try to figure out what's common among people. And so that's what the DSM is trying to do. It's been criticized. The good news about it, it's much more research based. The bad news is that it still gets criticized for the kinds of things we talked about early in our class about taking all this complex human experience and reducing it down to, a list of symptoms or um, whatever, or turning human experience into diagnoses, And so there are all kinds of specific criticisms too about some of the disorders, some of the disorders that are in the DSM. People kind of question whether that's a real diagnosis or not, and so it does. It certainly gets its rule of criticism, its share of criticism.